We're really glad to see this ruling. It's a very favorable ruling for religious freedom and restores the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to its proper place in this area of the law. Well, it's a victory in the sense that employers like the Greens and the Hans, and then hopefully now the Little Sisters of the Poor, won't have to violate their conscience and provide drugs and services to their employees that violate their most deeply held religious beliefs. Just because you're an employer doesn't mean that you have to pay essentially fines or comply with something that violates your most deeply held beliefs. That doesn't mean that you're trying to deny anybody anything, but I think that's our first freedom. The founders considered it our first freedom, and for people of faith to feel like they can live in a diverse and pluralistic society and be respected for who they are, this is a huge victory.
Corporations are not religious organizations. They don't sit in pews, they don't give tithes, they certainly don't pray, and they don't bring things to the potluck like my family and I do when we go to church. It's an insult, really, to those of us who are a part of religious communities and worship and pray and study together every week to have a corporation be called a religious organization. Immediately, the impact will be on those economically marginal people for whom birth control is an absolute luxury. People like cashiers in the very stores that brought this case are having a hard time feeding their families, educating their children, and keeping a roof over their heads. And so for them, the health care that would have been afforded them through the Affordable Care Act was vital, and they will lose that in the short run. And as a pastor, I have to say my heart breaks for those people and the very difficult decisions that lie ahead for them. It's nonsense to think of a dichotomy between religious people and people who believe in a woman's right to control her own body. Those people are the same people. Vast majorities of Catholics, of mainline Christians, of Unitarians, of Jews, those are the folks we know are appalled, all are in favor of the use of and actually use contraception. So it's simply not true, and it only serves the oppressor if we continue to tell that as if it's true.
What the Supreme Court today did was upheld our fundamental American right to freedom of conscience. We're talking a lot about religious liberty today here, but this is also a win for freedom of conscience, regardless of what you believe. And that's what has always made America so unique, is that we protect people's opinion no matter what it is in this country. I think it's really important to remind people that Hobby Lobby actually has provided contraceptive coverage to their employees for many, many years. What the Hahn family and the Green families objected to was the Obama administration's mandate to provide life-ending drugs. There's a real difference between the life-ending drugs that were included in this HH mandate and other kinds of drugs. And so that's why it's so important to protect the freedom of conscience, is because the Hahns and the Greens had the right to make that decision. This is really a decision that reflects common sense. And a lot of times you don't win on common sense, but this one really was. And so moving forward, I think this will be a linchpin and a foundation that does spread out to the other decisions as we move forward.
It's a miserable decision. It has an adverse effect on women. If there was a war on women before this morning, there's a nuclear war on women today. I do believe that more corporations, starting with closely held corporations, will now try to get into court making an argument that some allegedly deeply held religious belief does no longer require them to obey other federal laws. And in the long run, Justice Kennedy might not go along with that, but as the minority votes today suggest, we're a hair's breadth away from that happening, and that's too close for comfort. There are ways to address this, perhaps even by executive action, certainly by legislation, or even amending the Constitution, as some have suggested, to make it clear that corporations aren't people for purposes of practicing religion. I have yet to see any American corporation that has been allowed to get married, take the sacraments, and I don't think any of them are being raptured either.